I cheated at his company Gala. He vanished without a single word. I destroyed my marriage by having a careless, arrogant affair with my husband's business partner. I got caught because I foolishly left my iPad unlocked on the kitchen island. I fully expected my husband to scream, throw things, and demand couples counseling. That is the script. Instead, he didn't raise his voice a single decibel. He packed a single suitcase, walked out the front door, and surgically erased his entire existence from my life. After 7 months of agonizing silence and social ruin, I finally tracked him down across the country to beg for closure. His response destroyed me worse than any screaming match ever could. Here is my side of the story. 214 days. That is exactly how long it has been since I came home from the grocery store to a completely empty house, and realized that my entire life had been violently turned inside out. There was absolutely no angry letter left on the kitchen counter. There was no dramatic, screaming confrontation. My husband just disappeared like smoke in the wind, taking absolutely every single trace of his existence with him. And the absolute worst part of my daily reality is that everyone who knows the truth, my family, his family, our entire social circle, and thousands of strangers on the internet, firmly believes I got exactly the punishment I deserved. My name is Valerie. I am 31 years old, and I am slowly, agonizingly losing my mind trying to extract closure from a man who clearly never wants to be found. I was married to a man named David. David is 34. He is incredibly intelligent, deeply methodical, and he was fiercely loyal to me. He was the co-founder of a highly successful logistics software company. My entire catastrophic downfall started with such an incredibly careless, arrogant mistake. I had left my iPad completely unlocked and sitting on our quartz kitchen island while I ran down the street to grab expensive wine for a dinner party. When I walked back through the front door, David was standing perfectly still in the kitchen, staring silently down at the glowing screen. His face was completely blank. That should have been my absolute first warning. David was an incredibly expressive, warm man. If he was happy, you knew it. If he was stressed about a software launch, you saw it in his eyes. What's wrong? I asked him, setting the heavy grocery bags down on the counter. He did not answer me. He just reached out, quietly closed the smart cover over the iPad screen, and calmly walked past me toward the stairs. I heard the heavy oak doors of his closet sliding open. I heard the distinct sound of wooden hangers shifting. By the time my legs finally carried me up to the master bedroom, he already had his leather duffel bag open on the mattress. He was methodically, precisely folding his clothes. "David, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice rising in pitch. Still absolutely no answer. He moved with terrifying, robotic purpose. He was only taking the bare essentials. His tailored work clothes, his toiletries, his laptop, and the vintage watch his father had given him. He was actively leaving behind absolutely everything we had purchased together. He was leaving behind every single item that carried a memory of our marriage. "Will you please just talk to me?" I pleaded, panic finally clawing at my throat. "What exactly did you see?" He paused. Just for a fraction of a second. He looked up at me. His eyes were completely unrecognizable. They were empty, hollow, and incredibly distant. He looked at me exactly like I was a stranger standing too close to him on a subway platform. "Everything," he said quietly. He immediately went back to zipping his bag. My stomach violently dropped through the floorboards as my brain finally processed what he meant. The iMessages. My iPad was synced directly to my phone. I had left the messaging app open. Months of highly explicit, careless, arrogant messages between me and Greg. Greg was David's charismatic, flashy business partner. He was the co-founder of their company. Every single photo, every plan for our next secret meeting, all of it was sitting right there, carelessly illuminated on the kitchen island for my husband to read. "David, please, I can explain everything," I stammered, reaching out to grab his arm. "No," he said. It was just one word. It was incredibly firm, but it carried absolutely no heat. There was no rage. There were no demanded explanations. There were no flying plates. There was absolutely no drama. "I am done," he stated objectively. "You can't just leave like this." I screamed at him. "Watch me," he replied. And I did. I stood frozen and watched him swing the heavy bag over his shoulder. I watched him grab his car keys off the dresser. I watched him walk right past me like I was a piece of invisible furniture. I followed him frantically down the stairs, begging, crying ugly tears, making every single desperate promise a guilty woman could possibly invent. He did not respond to a single syllable. He did not look back. He loaded his bag into his car, started the engine, and drove away. That was a Tuesday afternoon. I sat on the living room floor, fully, arrogantly convinced that he would eventually come back once he cooled off. Men always came back, didn't they? That was the established script. They yelled. They stormed out into the night to drink. They demanded space. And then, a few days later, they returned for the inevitable, emotional confrontation. I was expecting the hot tears, the bitter accusations, the desperate bargaining. I expected us to book an expensive couples counselor and set strict conditions for staying together. I expected to be punished, but I never expected to be deleted. David absolutely refused to follow the script. I called his phone hundreds of times during that first week. Every single call went straight to a sterile, automated voicemail. His inbox eventually filled up. I texted massive, frantic novels of apologies, long-winded explanations, and desperate pleas for forgiveness. The messages all showed as delivered, but they never transitioned to read. I drove in a panic to his corporate office. The receptionist looked at me with deep pity and told me David had taken an indefinite leave of absence. I drove frantically to his brother's house in the suburbs. Nobody answered the doorbell, even though I could see cars in the driveway. I drove to his parents' house. His mother literally looked at me through the living room window, made direct eye contact, and coldly pulled the heavy curtains shut. By the second week, absolute, suffocating terror set in. This wasn't normal human behavior. People didn't just magically vanish into thin air because of a marital affair. They fought. They hurt each other. They angrily demanded closure. They absolutely didn't just surgically erase themselves from your entire existence like you were a cancelled subscription. I tried absolutely every digital avenue available. I went to his Facebook profile to message him. He had completely blocked me. I checked Instagram, Twitter, and even LinkedIn. Blocked everywhere. I created anonymous fake accounts just to check his status. He had somehow preemptively blocked those too, like he possessed a terrifying sixth sense for my digital presence. I emailed his secure work address. The server bounced it back immediately. His corporate account had been officially deactivated. Our mutual friends were absolutely no help. They had all rapidly, decisively chosen sides, and nobody had chosen mine. I desperately called Madison, a woman I had considered my absolute best friend for 5 years. "Have you heard anything from David?" I pleaded into the phone. "Yes," she said simply. Her voice was freezing cold. "Is he okay? Where is he?" "He is perfectly fine, Valerie. And he does not want you to know where he is." "Madison, please," I begged, crying again. "I know I made a massive mistake, but this is completely insane. A husband cannot just disappear without a trace." Apparently, he can, she replied sharply. And honestly, Valerie? After exactly what you did to him, I absolutely do not blame him. What I did? I stammered defensively. I had an affair. People make mistakes and have affairs all the time, Madison. They don't just. You had an affair with his business partner, Madison interrupted, her voice dripping with disgust. At their company's 5-year anniversary gala. Hearing it stated out loud, completely stripped of my internal justifications, made it sound incredibly dark and malicious. Greg and I had been flirting dangerously for months. The corporate gala, fueled by expensive champagne and massive egos, was simply the venue where the tension finally broke. And you didn't just sleep with him, Madison continued relentlessly. You texted Greg specific, cruel details about how completely boring David was in bed compared to him. You mocked his work ethic. You mocked the exact company he built. I stopped breathing. How do you know that? Because Greg's wife found the same iMessages, Valerie, Madison said. David sent screenshots of everything to her before he left. She is currently burning Greg to the ground in divorce court. He's being forced out of his own company. She hung up the phone. I stared at the black screen, processing the sheer, catastrophic magnitude of my actions. David hadn't just discovered a momentary physical lapse in judgment. He had discovered a calculated, months-long emotional assassination of his character, conducted with the very man he trusted to run his business. The absolute humiliation he must have felt reading those words on the iPad. The profound, sickening betrayal not just of my infidelity, but of who I had chosen, and exactly how I had spoken about him behind his back. By the second month, I was completely unraveling. David had been terrifyingly surgical in his logistical disappearance. I logged into our joint bank accounts. They had been properly, mathematically divided. He had electronically transferred exactly 50% of the liquid assets to a private account. He didn't take a single penny more than his legal share. The house was legally in my name, a generous wedding gift from my wealthy parents, so he made absolutely no claim to the property. But the absolute most agonizing part of the isolation was what he intentionally left behind. He didn't hire movers to collect his expensive suits. He abandoned his vast collection of books, his intricate coffee equipment, and even the framed movie posters in the basement he loved so fiercely. He intentionally, surgically abandoned every single material possession he cherished, just so he would never have to speak to me again. My beautiful, $1 million home had simply become a silent, suffocating museum dedicated to a ghost. I hired an incredibly expensive private investigator. I felt like an absolute, psychotic stalker handing the man a check, but I was completely desperate for a single conversation. The PI took my thousands of dollars, did extensive digital and physical digging, and came back 2 weeks later with virtually nothing. Your husband genuinely does not want to be found, ma'am, the investigator told me across his desk. He legally changed his mobile phone number. He moved completely out of state. He is paying for absolutely everything in cash or through heavily shielded corporate LLCs. There has to be something, I pleaded. The only legal action I can definitively confirm is that he filed for divorce in Nevada, the PI said. It is a quick, clean, no-fault state. The legal papers should arrive at your door soon. They did. They were delivered by a bored courier on a random Wednesday afternoon. It was a simple, sterile petition for dissolution of marriage. There were absolutely no financial demands. There were no bitter, written accusations of adultery attached. It was just a quiet, incredibly efficient legal request to formally end our 5-year marriage as quickly as the law allowed. His signature was already neatly printed at the bottom. The return address was just an anonymous P.O. box in a city I didn't recognize. There was absolutely no physical way to track him. I stubbornly refused to sign the documents for 6 entire weeks. I arrogantly thought my signature was the absolute only piece of leverage I still possessed. I thought that if he truly wanted a legal divorce, he would be forced to face me in a courtroom. My exhausted lawyer sat me down and completely shattered that delusion. That isn't how the law works, Valerie, she explained with a sigh. He can easily secure a default judgment without your signature. It will just take slightly longer. And frankly, aggressively fighting a man who is asking for nothing makes you look incredibly vindictive in front of a judge. Sign the papers. Let the man go. But I physically couldn't do it. Not without looking him in the eyes one final time. Not without forcing him to understand that yes, I had made a horrific, selfish mistake, but we had shared 5 entire years of life together. You simply do not throw half a decade of history into an incinerator without at least affording your partner a 10-minute conversation. Month 3 arrived, and I completely cracked under the pressure of the isolation. I started posting heavily on my public social media accounts about my situation. I didn't post the sordid details. I wasn't that stupid. I posted vague, incredibly highly curated quotes about missing a lost love, about the profound human need for forgiveness, and about the beauty of second chances. I thought maybe, just maybe, if I could farm enough public sympathy, someone from his camp would feel sorry for me and leak his location. It backfired in the most spectacular, devastating way imaginable. Someone, I never discovered if it was a former friend or Greg's furious ex-wife, posted the absolute, unvarnished truth in the public comments section of my most emotional post. They detailed the affair. They named Greg. They mentioned the company Gala. They even quoted snippets of the graphic text messages I had sent. Within 6 hours, I was massively trending on a popular relationship subreddit. Woman cheats with husband's co-founder at company Gala. Shocked when husband literally vanishes. The viral post became an absolute sensation. And the thousands of comments from strangers were utterly brutal. Play stupid games, win incredibly stupid prizes. This man is an absolute legend. This is the exact level of unbothered peace I aspire to. She really, genuinely thought he'd stick around and fight for her after that level of profound disrespect? The absolute delusion is staggering. Strangers from all over the globe eagerly weighed in on my failed marriage, my deeply flawed character, and my physical appearance. They tracked down my Instagram. They found my professional LinkedIn profile. The direct messages I received ranged from people aggressively calling me horrific names, to highly detailed, graphic descriptions of exactly what they thought karma should do to me. I was forced to instantly lock down and privatize every single account I owned. But the digital screenshots were already taken. The damage lived forever on the internet. My employer saw the viral posts. Human Resources called me into a sterile conference room for a highly uncomfortable meeting about maintaining professional standards and representing the agency's core values. I wasn't officially fired, but I was placed on strict, heavily monitored probation. I was a massive liability. Greg had already been completely forced out of his own software company. The board of directors had leveraged a morality clause in his contract. I hadn't spoken to him since the day David left. The absolute worst part of my existence was the profound, echoing isolation. Friends who had previously stood fiercely by my side through other bad life decisions drew a hard, permanent line in the sand over this. My own older sister, who had fiercely defended me since childhood, just shook her head when I sat in her kitchen and desperately tried to explain my feelings. "You didn't just casually cheat on him, Valerie," she said quietly. "You profoundly, aggressively humiliated him. You slept with his best friend. You actively mocked the life he was building for you behind his back." "I made a mistake," I sobbed. "You made a series of highly calculated, deeply selfish choices for months," she corrected me. "And now you are facing the actual consequences. David absolutely does not owe you closure. He doesn't owe you a performance. He doesn't owe you anything." By month 4, I was attending intense weekly therapy. Not because I actively wanted to improve myself, but because I was literally, functionally losing my mind. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat solid food. I couldn't focus on anything but tracking David's digital ghost. My therapist, Dr. Evans, was the very first person who didn't immediately, visibly judge me. "Tell me exactly why you chose to have the affair," she asked gently during our third session. "Not the physical details. The psychological motivation. What were you desperately looking for?" I had never actually stopped to analyze the why. "Excitement, I guess," I admitted, staring at the floor. David was incredibly safe. He was so deeply predictable. Greg was flashy. He was dangerous. "And why did you specifically need dangerous?" she pressed. "Because it was thrilling. The sneaking around. The validation. The fact that a wealthy, powerful man was risking his own marriage just to be with me." Dr. Evans made a few quiet notes on her pad. "How do you honestly think David felt when he read those messages?" "Betrayed. Hurt. Incredibly angry." I listed the obvious emotions. "What else?" I thought about it deeply for the very first time. I put myself in his shoes standing at that kitchen island. "Humiliated," I whispered, my voice cracking. Like our entire 5-year marriage was just a pathetic joke. Like he was an absolute fool for trusting me to protect him. "And what do you think a highly logical man feeling that profound level of humiliation might desperately need to survive it?" "Distance," I admitted, tears welling in my eyes. Time to heal without the specific person who destroyed him constantly demanding his attention. "So why," Dr. Evans asked softly, "are you trying so incredibly hard to force him to look at you?" "Because I desperately need him to know I'm sorry." I cried. "I need him to know it wasn't about him lacking anything. I need him to know I still love him." "Do you truly love him, Valerie?" she asked carefully. "Or do you simply love the absolute stability and comfort that his presence guaranteed?" That specific question completely haunted me. Did I actually love David the human being? Or did I just love the life his grueling work ethic provided? The steady, massive paycheck? The beautiful luxury house? The absolute, unshakable certainty of having a man who would never, ever abandon me? When I honestly thought about what I missed the most, it wasn't the passionate romance. It was the quiet Sunday mornings reading in bed. It was him cooking dinner while I answered emails. It was the way he handled my family's chaotic drama with absolute grace. It was the comfortable things. The safe things I had thrown away because I was bored. "I don't know," I finally answered the therapist truthfully. "Then perhaps his absolute disappearance is actually a profound gift," she said. "For both of you." Month 7 brought a sudden, totally unexpected development. A former college roommate ran into David's younger brother at a tech conference in Austin, Texas. She texted me immediately. She mentioned that David was living in Austin, doing highly lucrative independent consulting, and that he looked incredibly healthy. That single data point sent me completely spiraling out of control. I hired a brand new, highly aggressive private investigator based in Texas. I paid him triple his normal rate for an expedited search. He found David's physical address in exactly 3 days. He was living in a sleek, high-rise apartment downtown. He had no public social media presence, but he was undeniably alive, and apparently, thriving without me. I booked a direct flight the very next morning. I showed up at the lobby of his consulting firm, and I waited aggressively on the sidewalk like a complete lunatic. When he finally walked out the heavy glass doors at 5 o'clock, carrying a coffee and chatting casually with a colleague, my heart physically stopped beating. He looked incredible. He looked healthier than he had in years. He was wearing a sharp, tailored coat. His posture was relaxed. He looked exactly like a man who had dropped a massive, toxic anchor from his neck. He saw me standing by the curb before I could even take a step toward him. The casual, easy laughter instantly died on his face. It was immediately replaced by that exact same, terrifyingly blank expression I had seen in our kitchen 7 months ago. He quietly said something to his colleague, who quickly glanced my way with widened eyes and rapidly walked away. David turned and began walking purposefully toward the parking garage, completely refusing to acknowledge my physical existence. "David, please wait," I screamed, running in heels to catch up to him. He stopped walking, but he did not turn around to face me. "How exactly did you find me?" he asked. His voice was freezing cold. "Does it even matter?" I cried, reaching out toward his shoulder. "We desperately need to talk." "No, Valerie. We absolutely do not." 5 years, David. I pleaded, tears instantly streaming down my face. "Don't I deserve at least 10 minutes of your time?" He slowly turned around then. And the absolute deadness in his eyes stopped me cold in my tracks. There was absolutely no simmering anger. There was no lingering, painful hurt. There was just nothing. He looked at me like I was a highly complicated math equation he had successfully solved months ago and completely forgotten about. I was no longer a person he loved. I was just an outdated file. "Deserve?" he repeated quietly. He almost smiled, but it lacked any trace of warmth. "You already have exactly what you deserve, Valerie. You have nothing." "That's not fair." I sobbed loudly, trying to draw attention from people walking by, hoping social pressure would force him to engage. "Fair?" he asked softly, stepping slightly closer so only I could hear his devastating, surgical precision. "Was it mathematically fair when you were sleeping with my business partner in the founder's suite while I was downstairs giving a toast to your loyalty? Was it fair when you sent him highly explicit text messages mocking my ambition while you were spending my money?" "I never meant to hurt you," I started to stammer. "I do not care what you meant," he interrupted smoothly. "I only process what you actually did. And what you did provided me with all the necessary data regarding my exact value in your life. You still matter to me," I begged, grasping at straws. David held up a single hand, stopping my words entirely. "This is exactly what you desperately wanted, isn't it?" He analyzed me coldly. "You want the cinematic drama. You want the screaming match. You want the passionate confrontation so you can feel incredibly important to me again." I stared at him, my mouth trembling. "Well, I am not going to give you a performance, Valerie," he stated with absolute finality. "I am not going to yell. I am not going to cry. I am not going to fight for us. I am just going to continue living a highly peaceful, successful life completely without you in it." "What about forgiveness?" I choked out, desperate for a lifeline. "What about second chances?" "Forgiveness is an internal process for my own peace of mind," he explained clinically. "It does not require me to grant you access to my reality. Second chances are reserved for people who make honest mistakes. You made a series of highly calculated, deliberate choices for 6 months." He checked his vintage watch. The exact watch he had packed in his duffel bag. "I have a dinner reservation to get to," he said dismissively. "Go home, Valerie. Sign the divorce papers. Stop embarrassing yourself." He turned his back on me, walked into the parking garage, and disappeared into the shadows without a single backward glance. I stood completely alone on the concrete sidewalk in a strange city, finally, agonizingly understanding the absolute truth. The marriage was entirely, irrevocably over. Not because he was harboring a deep, burning hatred for me that I could eventually extinguish with apologies, but because he had successfully found absolute, genuine peace in my total absence. I flew back to my empty, silent house that exact same night. I woke up the next morning, drank a cup of black coffee, and I finally signed the divorce papers. I mailed them back to his anonymous P.O. box. The legal filing was quick, utterly silent, and entirely uncontested. By month 8, I was officially divorced. I was officially, profoundly alone. I was officially the toxic villain in a viral internet story that had already been completely forgotten by everyone in the world, except for me. David never came back online. He never dramatically unblocked me to send a final, angry message. He never, ever gave me the explosive confrontation I had subconsciously craved to validate my own worth. He just permanently, surgically removed himself from my grid. My therapist frequently tells me that I am grieving not just the death of the relationship, but the death of the dramatic narrative I had arrogantly created in my head. I fully expected a fiery, passionate explosion that I could eventually control. Instead, I received the terrifying, absolute vacuum of space. The opposite of true love is absolutely not hate. Hate requires intense emotional energy. Hate requires a pulse. The opposite of love is absolute, unyielding indifference. And David's flawless, calculated indifference to my existence is actively driving me insane. I still check my phone every single morning for text messages I know mathematically will never arrive. I still expect him to eventually crack under the pressure, to need closure the exact same way that I desperately need it. He won't. I know that now with agonizing certainty. David gave me exactly, precisely what I gave him. A unilateral, permanent decision to end our partnership without any input or consideration for the other person's feelings. He discovered my betrayal, and he simply closed the laptop. And somehow, that absolute silence is infinitely worse than any screaming match we could have ever had in that kitchen. Because fighting would imply that he still cared enough to bleed for me. Disappearing simply means he analyzed the data, and logically decided I wasn't worth the energetic expenditure. Everyone on the internet genuinely thinks I deserve this absolute isolation. They are probably entirely right. I profoundly humiliated a good man in the worst possible way, at the worst possible time, with the absolute worst possible person. I arrogant turned our vows into a cheap punchline. But knowing logically that you deeply deserve a punishment does not make it any easier to survive the sentence. I am slowly, painfully learning to live with the catastrophic consequences of my own arrogance. I am learning to sit alone in the profound discomfort of being the undeniable villain in my own life story. I have to accept the terrifying reality that not every ending comes with a neat, cinematic bow of closure. Not every single mistake earns a pathway to forgiveness. David vanished into thin air because it was the absolute kindest, most efficient thing he could possibly do for his own survival. Fighting me would have been easier, but walking away in silence was infinitely cleaner. He gave me exactly what I had been aggressively chasing with Greg, a future entirely without him in it. The agonizing fact that I desperately want him back now that he is completely untouchable is just the final, cruel cosmic joke. I am the woman who blew up her life for a cheap thrill at a company party. I am the cautionary tale. And I am slowly, brutally accepting that this heavy, suffocating, absolute nothingness is exactly what I earned. That was Valerie's side, a woman who arrogantly destroyed a secure, loving marriage because she was addicted to the illusion of dramatic passion. Valerie viewed her hard-working, loyal husband David as a boring safety net. She ruthlessly cheated on him with his charismatic business partner, completely expecting to control the fallout when she was inevitably caught. She fully expected David to scream, panic, and fight to keep her. Instead, David mathematically processed her betrayal, immediately packed a bag, and executed a flawless, terrifyingly quiet disappearance. When Valerie finally tracked him down across the country to beg for closure, David delivered the ultimate, chilling checkmate, absolute, genuine indifference. Valerie learned the agonizingly hard way that a truly disciplined man doesn't fight for a broken contract, he simply walks away and builds a better life without you. What do you think? Did Valerie get exactly the brutal, humiliating reality check she deserved, or was David's absolute, cold refusal to grant her 10 minutes of closure too unyielding? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to Silent Speaks for more stories about loud arrogance meeting quiet consequences. New stories every day. #NoClosure